the voice of the Tampa Bay Rays, Mr. Andrew Fried. What's going on, Andrew?
Hey guys, how you doing? Hope everybody's staying safe up there.
We are,
Thanks,
man.
you too.
How is your family doing?
Well, I mean, we're doing what everybody else is doing, and that's staying inside just as much as we can. We haven't driven each other too crazy as of yet, but my kids and I, we got a dog, so we take him for walks, and outside of that, we pretty much stay at home, except for trips to the grocery store and just trying to do our part. Try to get this thing to go away as fast as possible, get back to some baseball.
Well, speaking of getting back to baseball, do you think there's going to be a baseball season this year?
I think there will be. I'm not so sure that there should be. But really, I say that only in light of the fact that, there's no cure for this thing yet, and people can't be around each other safely. So, and yet at the same time, and it's not to be diminished, but secondarily, but pretty close second, is that these teams have to make money, and the reason is because they've got to pay their employees. So it's going to be a lost year in many ways, but if they can cobble together some sort of season and generate some sort of income through television and have games without fans, I think that is a worthwhile proposition, as long and only if that it's still safe for even those of us that the small amount of us that'll be around each other, it's still safe, because there's no reason to get anybody sick over a baseball game, regardless of the economics. But I do think that on balance, it is almost as shocking to the system when people are losing their jobs as it is for what is happening for so many people around the country right now. And I think, from a financial standpoint, there probably will be some sort of season. What it's going to be, I don't know. I have this fantasy that this is the year we should just try everything. Do the robot arms, do the time between pitches, scratch every itch that you've thought of Major League Baseball, and let's see how it goes. Whether, maybe an 80-game season or something like that. Who knows?
Andrew, obviously there is going to be a shortened season, and the Rays have a lot of young players, several top 100 prospects, including the number one prospect in baseball. Do you think these guys are MLB ready, and how do you think the delayed season will affect their development, if they are?
Well, I think, the pitchers are the ones, when spring training ever gets started again, if it does, they're the ones, basically, spring training is all about the pitchers. That's kind of the reason that we even have it. Hitters, it tends to not take too much time, comparatively speaking, to get their timing down. For pitchers, though, you've got to ramp up. You can't just go out there and throw 95 pitches at 90 miles an hour and expect to bounce back. So, that's going to take time for the pitchers to build up. I think whenever we get the season started, and hopefully it's a when, that there will be expanded rosters, so you can have more pitchers on there, especially for a team like the Rays and other teams that are using things like the opener and want to make sure that they're not overtaxing certain pitchers, especially now. Remember, the pitchers were almost, not fully, but they're about halfway there to being ramped up, ready for the season, which would have happened about 2.5 weeks after it was postponed. So they're going to have to build all the way back up. In terms of then, I'm guessing maybe a 3 to 4 week spring training of some kind. In terms of the prospects, Wander Franco, who you're talking about, the number one prospect, no, I don't think he's ready for the big leagues yet. He just turned 19 years old. I spent 11 years in the minor leagues as a broadcaster, and I always use this because it's true. I saw so many guys that were rushed to the major leagues that were can't-miss prospects that didn't work out well in the big leagues. I never saw a guy that was held back a little longer not succeed because of that. In other words, I'd rather err on the side of caution for a young player. There's a lot more to being a big league player I've come to learn over these last 15, 16 years than just how do you do between the white lines. It's a whole different lifestyle up here, and for a kid that's 19, I would like to see Wander Franco get as many reps as he can, and then only get here when he's able to come up and not have to go back to the minors.
We are talking to the great Andrew Fried, the voice of the Tampa Bay Rays. Andrew, does Blake Snell get back to that Cy Young year that he had in 2017, 2018? He had an off season last year.
That year, so many things fell into place that the Rays utilized him very, very well. They got him in and got him out of games when it was necessary. So they kept his pitch count where it needed to be, and he was really strong towards the end of the year. But Blake is a great example of a guy that became a really good pitching prospect, and then when he came up, while it looked like he was ready, he really wasn't, and he got beat up and had to go back to the minor leagues for some significant time. Then when he came back once again, he was ready to really blast forward. Blake has four great pitches. I mean, he's got fastball at 97, true curveball, true slider, true changeup. And that's just not that common amongst pitchers. Usually you'll see fastball, changeup, and one of the two breaking pitches. Every once in a while, there's always one that's okay. His curve is better than a slider, or slider better than the curve. Blake, all four pitches are really out pitches. So last year, I think, was like that typical year that happens after the Cy Young year that you see so many times throughout baseball history. For whatever reason, the breaks didn't go his way. He wasn't quite as sharp. The expectation was there that hadn't been there, and then he was hurt. So everything kind of came together. I mean, Blake is at least was. I haven't seen him since, March 11th or 12th, whenever we were all back in Port Charlotte. He is in great shape this year. So, all signs are there. I can't predict that he's going to go win the Cy Young again, but I think he has every bit of ace written all over him. And, if he's the pitcher that this rotation is centered around, then we're in pretty good shape.
Now, if there is a baseball season, there is some talks that they're going to try to change the divisions into a cactus and grapefruit league and change the divisions around because it makes it easier for these teams to play against one another. What are your thoughts to that if the MLB decides to do that?
Well, I mean, everything's an if. I mean, every single option that they have trying to get this thing started has challenges to it. Every single option is not perfect. This year, regardless of whether we actually have the baseball season or not, it's not going to be like any other season that's ever been going back to the 1800s. This is going to be a very different, very odd, rather uncomfortable, unorthodox sort of a season. So regardless of how they do it, I'm looking at it as at least hopefully there will be some sort of baseball. If they blow up the leagues and the divisions for 1 year and we have a thing where it's the Florida teams together, and then you play the Arizona teams. Okay, I mean that's nothing is really optimal. Nothing is really great at this point. But there are more things more important. Keeping people safe. I mean, to me, as long as we are deemed safe to be around each other, then I'm all for everything. I mean, what I would love, of course, like everyone else, is to have as much normalcy as possible. I'd like to not have to blow up the leagues for a year and not have to blow up the divisions and make it regional with the Grapefruit League teams against the Cactus Leagues teams. But look, if that's the way it has to be, then that's the way. If it's either that or nothing, I'll take that 10 times out of 10. I'm not so sure that it's going to have to be that way though, because I don't know that Arizona is ever going to be safer than Florida, is ever going to be safer than New York, is ever going to be safer than Kansas City. I mean, I don't. I think the whole thing comes down to safety. I mean, we all want this game to be played. People need to be able to support their families from a salary standpoint, but I think the country could certainly use some pretty good television, which would be Major League Baseball. But as long as the experts, and I mean the true experts, the people that study this stuff, the epidemiologists, the scientists, the people that are smart, that have studied this stuff, Dr. Fauci, who's become a rock star. When they say it's safe to play, that's when I'll feel good playing, and not a moment before.
We are talking to the great voice of the Tampa Bay Rays, Andrew Fried.
Andrew, I personally thought he should have been one manager of the year last year. Did a great job with the second lowest payroll. Do you think he got snubbed to win the award, or are you surprised he wasn't even nominated in one of those top three?
I mean, obviously, I'm probably more than biased because I've been with the Rays for 15 years and know the obstacles that the organization faces when you're in a division with Boston and New York and Toronto and Baltimore, and they can all outspend you by large margins. I think that Rays managers, whenever you make postseason, should probably win the Manager of the Year every year. To me, the greatest thing, the greatest accomplishment that's ever happened in this organization, and I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember what it was like back in 2008.
I do.
When the Rays won for the first time under Joe Madden. I mean, it was heresy to think that the Rays could ever not only finish ahead of, but even compete with Boston and New York. And to not only get by them and win the division, and then do it again 2 years later, in 2010, win the American League East. I mean, to me, that would have seemed so crazy a decade ago. now the Rays have broken that mold and said you can win this division, but the manager and the front office has to stay a little bit ahead, if not a lot ahead, of what the other teams are doing. And because, I mean, Kevin Cash, I've said this before, he manages more by the third inning than most managers do the entire game with regard to openers and pitchers and the way it's set up and the way the front office comes up with their game plans for that night and the way they alternate players in and out. More than just platoons, it's sometimes different combinations of players every game, almost inning to inning sometimes. That I think there is more true. A lot of times, I think a lot of managers do their best work from the ninth inning to the first inning. In other words, after the game until the next day, probably do most of their managing. I think those that have managed the Rays, in particular Joe Madden and Kevin Cash, not only managed well during that time, but during the game, they're doing X's and O's, all throughout the game. If you could see the voluminous information that they are juggling every day, leading up to the game itself, and then right after the game when they do their own post-game wrap with the front office, I mean, there is a lot going on. So I'll call it what it is. I think Kevin Cash could win the Manager of the Year the last couple of years. Now, Bob Melvin won it 2 years ago. I was all for that. Last year, I would have loved to have seen Kevin to take that team to 96 wins. To me, not only should it have been top three, you should have been number one.